The morning air carried the scent of damp earth and wood smoke. Greyford Castle loomed over the valley, its stone walls catching the pale light. Sir Aldrich of Varro, commander of the garrison, had started his day as always. Inspections, orders, brief words with the watch captain. Yet after dismissing his men, he found himself taking the narrow path down to the village. He told himself it was to check the market road, but in truth he followed a quieter pull, the sound of water. The old well stood in the heart of the village. Its stones were smooth from centuries of hands and buckets. Smoke curled from nearby chimneys, and the linden tree's leaves moved in a slow breeze. At the well, a young woman lifted a clay jug from the rope with steady hands. Her hair, dark and loose, fell forward as she poured the water into waiting jars. Aldrich paused. She noticed him but did not seem startled. He greeted her, and she replied with a calm smile. "My name is Maris," she said. "I live by the linden. My mother mends clothes, my brother works the timber road." He told her his name, without his rank. She nodded as though she already knew. There was a dusting of flour on her wrist and a covered basket at her feet, the smell of fresh bread escaping from beneath the cloth. "Water wakes the hands," she added, seeing his glance at the jug, "and it wakes the bread." He offered to carry the filled jars to her door. She agreed, and they walked together to the square by the linden. Their talk was simple, about the weather, the river's level, and a broken sign by the old bridge. Yet something in her voice made each word stay with him longer than it should. In the days that followed, Aldrich found reasons to take the lower path again. Sometimes Maris was there, sometimes not. When she was, they spoke of small matters. A roof in need of mending, the first frost on the fields, the stubborn cat that slept on her doorstep. He began to notice details of the village he had never paid attention to. The smell of bread cooling on a windowsill, the soft hammering from the cooper's shed, the way the well rope creaked like a slow heartbeat. One morning, Maris mentioned a ribbon tied to the well's edge had gone missing. "It's been there for years," she said. "A child left it for luck." A few days later, a charm vanished from the mill door, a twist of straw and feather meant to bring steady hands for the work. The miller's wife was uneasy, though she laughed it off in front of others. Aldrich dismissed the incidents at first, but he began to notice that some villagers no longer greeted Maris as warmly. A boy who once ran to her with news now paused at a distance. Small things, but they left a trace. Then came word from the West Road. Strangers were traveling between villages asking questions about unusual talents and people who could change the course of a day. Tomaikum. They wore no crest, but called themselves keepers of the old law. That evening, Aldrich found Maris again at the well. She filled her jug in silence, but when she looked up, her eyes were steady. "They are near," he told her. She tied the jug's lid and said, "Then we will be ordinary in everything." He nodded, though he knew in his heart that what was coming would be anything but ordinary. The morning broke clear and bright, but Greyford felt heavier than the sky suggested. It was the kind of day when voices stayed low and people lingered at doorways before stepping outside. Sir Aldrich of Varro left the castle early, taking the lower path into the village. He told himself it was to check the state of the road, yet his steps took him straight to the square by the linden. Maris was there, standing at a wooden board dusted with flour, shaping dough into neat loaves. The cat sat on the warm step nearby, tail curled like a question mark. She looked up when he approached, a faint smile softening her face. "You're out early," she said. "I could say the same," Aldrich replied. "Bread waits for no one," she said lightly, then added, "3 riders came last night. They asked about charms, the weather, and those who listened too closely." Aldrich's brow tightened. "And what did you tell them?" "That everyone listens if they want their washing to dry," she answered with a small shrug. They spoke briefly about the harvest and the road to the mill. Then he left, but her words followed him back to the castle like a small stone in his pocket. By noon he returned, The scent of baking was rich in the air. Maris had set 2 loaves to cool on the windowsill, their crust golden and split just enough to show the soft bread beneath. She handed him a slice before he asked. "Tell me if it wakes properly," she said. He bit into the crust. It crackled softly, giving way to warm, tender bread. The taste was deep and honest, and for a moment the day felt simpler. Then the chapel bells began their hour 1, 2, 3, and stopped abruptly, as if a hand had caught the rope mid-swing. Maris glanced toward the chapel. "Bells should finish their song," she said. "So should truths," Aldrich replied without thinking, and found the words heavier than he intended. That afternoon the riders returned. They came in plain coats and neat boots, their horses moving at a careful, measured pace. The tall one led, his hair streaked with gray, his eyes sharp but expressionless. They dismounted in the square, looped their reins neatly, and began speaking to the priest. Their voices carried just enough to be heard by anyone who wanted to listen. They asked about charms, about sudden sicknesses, about fortunes turning for no reason. They asked if anyone had seen lights in the fields or heard voices without a speaker. Their questions sounded like a list they had repeated in many villages before this one. The priest answered calmly, the reeve with clipped formality. The miller fidgeted but said little. Then the tall one called, "Maris, of the square by the linden." The square shifted. People turned their heads. Maris stepped forward, hands empty, face calm. Aldrich watched from the edge of the crowd. "Your bread is known for rising well," the tall man said. "Do you use herbs, powders, or other means?" "Yeast and warmth," she answered, "and time." "You keep no herbs?" "I keep flour and salt. No herbs. The ribbon from the well. It was tied there for years. It is gone. Do you know why?" "No, it was not mine to guard." "And yet," the man continued, "you were seen near the mill when its charm went missing." "I deliver flour there each week," she said, her tone even. "You may speak with the miller." He studied her for a long moment, then made a note in his narrow book. Around them the villagers shifted again, the space between them growing. Aldrich saw how some avoided meeting Maris's eyes. By the time the riders left, the square had thinned into small knots of conversation. Some claimed the men were harmless, only gatherers of law. Others whispered of old punishments and stories best left in the past. Doors closed earlier than usual. At sunset, the bells did not ring. Aldrich went to the chapel and found the rope lying on the floor, cleanly cut. The priest stood nearby, looking older than the morning. "Accident?" Aldrich asked. The priest shook his head. "A cut like this has a purpose." They tied a new knot together in silence. Aldrich thought about how small breaks could silence larger things. Night came with a cooling wind. On his way back to the castle, Aldrich passed the well. A fresh ribbon had been tied to its rim, pale blue against the dark stone. He stopped, resting a hand on the worn edge. The stone felt cool, the knot still firm. In the morning, the ribbon was gone. Only the faint mark of the knot remained. The morning came without wind, the air still as held breath. From the castle wall, Sir Aldrich could see the square below, already dotted with figures. People moved in slow, deliberate steps, as if the ground itself demanded caution. The chapel bell gave a single, steady note, not to mark the hour, but to summon. By the time Aldrich reached the square, the linden's shadow had stretched across the worn cobbles. The priest stood near the chapel steps, the reeve beside him, papers folded in his hands. The herbal woman leaned on her cane, her bundle of dried leaves tied at her belt. The miller shifted his weight from foot to foot, muttering to himself. All had been called. None had been told exactly what to expect. A murmur passed through the crowd when 3 horses appeared on the far road. The riders approached at an unhurried pace, their plain coats neat, their boots polished. The tall one rode in front, the same man Aldrich had seen before, hair marked with gray, eyes that never seemed to rest. Behind him, the second rider carried a satchel thick with papers. The third said nothing, but his gaze swept the square like a lantern's beam. They dismounted without ceremony. The tall man stepped forward. "This is a measure," he said, his voice carrying easily without shout. "We serve the law that stands before banners. We ask, we listen, we note. From this we see the truth." No one answered. Aldrich's hands rested loosely behind his back, though every muscle was ready. The questioning began with the priest. They asked about signs and wonders, about illnesses without cause, about blessings that came too easily. The priest's replies were steady, each word measured. The reeve was next, his answers clipped, factual. The miller's voice wavered, his eyes darting toward Maris more than once. Then the tall man called, "Maris of the square by the linden." A small ripple moved through the crowd, not sound, but a shift in stance, in breath. Maris stepped forward. She carried nothing in her hands, her gaze was level. "You bake bread that rises quickly," the tall man began. "What makes it so?" "Yeast, warmth, and time," she said. "You keep no herbs." "No herbs." "You knew of the ribbon at the well. It was gone." "I knew it was there. I did not take it." The man glanced at his notes. "You were seen near the mill the day the charm vanished. I bring flour there each week. The miller will confirm." The second man wrote in the book. The third continued to watch her, his expression unreadable. Around them the crowd held still, but Aldrich could see the small signs. A step back, an averted glance, a tightened jaw. The tall man's voice softened, though the words did not. "Do you ever know a thing before it happens? Weather? Sickness? Birth?" Maris shook her head. "I know when bread will burn if I do not take it out of the oven. That is all." He closed his book with a quiet snap. "Noted." Maris stepped back into the crowd without looking at anyone. Aldrich followed her with his eyes until she stood again in the linden shade. The questioning continued, moving through names on the list. Some spoke quickly, eager to be done. Others hesitated as if any answer might be turned against them. By the time the last name was called, the sun had climbed high enough to press the air down. The tall man stepped forward again. "We have listened. The measure is not finished. We will return." He mounted his horse. The others followed. They left at the same unhurried pace, their coats neat, their notes sealed in the satchel. When they were gone, the square loosened like cloth released from a tight stitch. Groups formed and broke apart. Voices lowered when certain names were spoken. Some went straight home, doors closing behind them. Others lingered, looking toward the road as if the riders might return before evening. Aldrich crossed the square to the well. He rested a hand on the rim, tracing the smooth stone where the ribbon had once been tied. The mark of the knot was still faintly visible. He thought of the pale blue ribbon from the night before, gone again by morning. "Sir," a voice said behind him. It was the reeve, his brow furrowed. "They'll come again. They said measure, but they meant watch." "I know," Aldrich replied. "What will you do?" "Keep watch as well." That afternoon, Aldrich walked the lanes. At each house he passed, he saw traces of the morning. A curtain drawn more tightly than before, a latch fixed that had hung loose for years. Children kept close to the doorway. He stopped by the mill. The miller confirmed Maris's visits, but his voice carried a new edge of caution. By the bakery, the air smelled of cooling bread. Maris was sweeping the step. She looked up at him briefly, then back to the broom. "They will be back," she said without question. "They said so." She leaned the broom against the wall. "I answered their questions. I will again. But I don't think they come for answers." "What then?" "To see who moves when they look." Aldrich considered that. "Then we should give them nothing to see." Maris gave a small nod. That will be harder for you than for me. Why? You wear the castle when you walk. I can leave my basket behind. Toward evening, the chapel bell rang again, late, uncertain, as though testing its own rope. The sound was clean, but the rhythm uneven. Aldrich stood beneath the linden and listened to the final note fade. Maris came to stand beside him, arms folded against the cooling air. They will choose a name next time, she said quietly, and if it is yours. She looked at the well. Then I hope those who know me remember before they believe. Aldrich's jaw tightened. I will remember. The bell rope held. The hour passed. Night drew in with a thin mist settling along the ground. Somewhere in the village, a door closed gently, and the square was left to the sound of water deep in the well. 2 days passed after the inquiry, but Greyford was no longer the same. The market was quieter, voices shorter. People who once lingered to share news now gave only a nod and moved on. It was as if the square had learned to listen before it spoke. Sir Aldrich crossed between castle and village more often than usual. He told himself it was to check the roads, the stores, the river crossing. All true. But he was also counting faces, watching greetings grow briefer, noticing shutters closed in daylight. Maris still worked the bakery each morning, her bread golden and warm. Yet fewer customers lingered. Some smiled and chatted. Others placed their coins quickly and left, as if haste could guard them from something unseen. They've started looking sideways, she said one afternoon. Yes, he replied, and so do you. It's like a cloth fraying, she murmured, one thread, then another. The first sign came on the third day. A basket of bread left at the cooper's door sat untouched until noon. By evening, the loaves were on the well's rim, a flat stone placed on top, a quiet mark that said more than words. The next day, a child burst into the square crying. He swore he had seen someone kneeling by the river, speaking toward the water. Dark hair, pale dress. The adults exchanged glances but said nothing in front of him. That evening, Aldrich found Maris closing her shutters early. They're shaping the story they want, she said. They'll look for more, he answered. On the 5th day, the keepers returned. No summons to the square this time. They spoke quietly to the priest, the reeve, and a handful of others. Aldrich saw the tall leader pause at the well, hand on the stone where the ribbon had once been. After they left, the reeve came to him. They wanted a list of households with iron charms. Said it was for protection. And you? I gave them every household. Every home has iron if you look. Aldrich almost smiled. Good. Maybe they'll know I knew. That night the chapel bell rang in the middle of the dark. Slow, deliberate. Doors opened. Faces appeared in shadow. No one saw who pulled the rope. By morning the rope was tied in a knot so tight it had to be cut before the hour could be rung. Small accidents began to draw whispers. A cart lost a wheel on the mill road. Someone said a woman with a jug had walked there wrong. A barrel of apples spoiled overnight. The story reached the market before the lid was lifted. On the 7th day, the keepers came again, now 5 in number. Their steps were heavier, their presence more felt. They visited doors, entered houses, emerged with notes. Aldrich intercepted them. You've been here 3 times in a week, he said. If there is an accusation, speak it. The tall man's gaze was steady. We measure first. When balance is broken, we restore it. And if it's only rumor? Rumor is a symptom. We treat the illness. Shuckum, they walked on. That evening, Maris was not at the bakery. Her mother sat by the hearth. She went to the river, alone. Aldrich followed the path. The river was still, pale in the moonlight. Maris knelt, dipping a jar. They'll twist this, he said. Then let them, she replied. Why go alone? If I wait until they stop watching, I'll go nowhere. They returned together. In the square, 2 keepers stood by the well, watching. The next morning, a notice was nailed to the chapel door. It named no one, but declared a hearing to address matters of influence over fortune, weather, and health. Attendance for certain households was expected. No list was posted. It didn't need to be. Maris read it with Aldrich beside her. We know my name's on their list. Yes, and you. I'll be there. Not because they call me. She let the paper go. Then we'd best be ready. Tretrafontum. The day before the hearing, wind from the north rattled shutters, bringing the smell of rain that never came. At the far edge of the village, Aldrich found a small group speaking in low voices. They fell silent when they saw him. You can't shield her forever, one man said. I can guard the truth. Truth changes when enough mouths say otherwise. They left him standing in the wind. That night, from the castle wall, Aldrich saw a single lantern outside the bakery. The light was steady. For a moment it looked like a beacon. Tomorrow it might be a signal. The morning of the hearing came with a heavy sky. Clouds hung low over Greyford, not yet breaking into rain, but heavy enough to press on the rooftops. From the castle wall, Sir Aldrich could see the square filling earlier than expected. People came in pairs and small groups, speaking little. A few carried baskets or tools as if pretending this was an ordinary day. When Aldrich reached the square, the linden's branches were still wet from the night's mist. The well stood at the center, its stone darkened, the mark of the vanished ribbon still faintly visible. The chapel door was open, the bell rope untied and ready. The priest stood near the chapel steps, pale but steady. The reeve held his folded papers. The herbal woman sat on the bench under the linden, her cane resting against her knee. The miller leaned on the well, eyes fixed on the cobbles. A hush fell when the keepers arrived. There were 6 this time, riding in 2 lines. Their coats were plain but new, their boots shining even in the dim light. The tall leader dismounted first, handing his reins to the youngest among them, without a word. The rest followed his movements exactly, as if each step were part of a practiced drill. This day, the tall man said, his voice measured and clear, we bring the measure to its conclusion. We have listened, we have noted, we will speak. They began with the priest. His answers were calm, but the questions had sharpened. No longer asking if he had seen signs, but if he could deny them outright. The reeve was asked whether his list of iron charms had been complete. The miller was pressed on who visited his door and what they carried. Then the tall man spoke the name everyone had been expecting. Maris of the square by the linden. She stepped forward without pause. Her dress was plain, her hair tied back. She carried no basket, no loaf, nothing that could be mistaken for a symbol. You bake bread that rises in half the time, the tall man began. I bake as I was taught, she replied. You were at the well when the ribbon was last seen. I have been at the well most mornings since I could walk. You were at the mill the day its charm vanished. I bring flour there every week. The tall man took a slow step toward her. Several in this square have said they have seen you speaking to the river. A ripple moved through the crowd. Maris's voice stayed even. I have spoken near the river, to people, to myself, never to the water. The second keeper opened his book. You deny that your presence has been followed by misfortune? I deny that misfortune has a keeper, she said. Aldrich watched the faces in the crowd. Some looked away. Some watched with an intentness that felt dangerous. He knew that once a story was told enough times, it stopped needing proof. The tall man turned to the crowd. We ask not for punishment, but for safety. The old law gives us the right to remove any influence that unsettles the balance of a place. The silence was deep enough to hear the small creak of the well's rope in the wind. Maris stood still. If the balance is in rumor, then removing me will not settle it. The tall man gave no answer. He looked to the second keeper who wrote a single line in the book. Then he turned back to the crowd. There will be a trial at sunset. Until then, she will remain under watch. Two of the keepers stepped forward, standing on either side of her. The tall man gestured toward the chapel. Aldrich moved before he had time to decide. She will not be taken from here like a thief in the night. If there is a trial, it will be held here, in the open, and under my watch. The tall man's gaze met his. Do you speak for the crown? I speak for the command of this garrison, and under its watch, no one disappears quietly. There was a pause long enough for the wind to shift. Finally, the tall man inclined his head. Then she will remain here, but she will remain in sight. The rest of the day was unlike any Greyford had known. People went about their tasks, but the square never emptied. Maris sat on the bench under the linden, the two keepers nearby. Aldrich stayed within sight, walking the edges of the square, speaking briefly to those he trusted. At midday, the chapel bell gave a single note and stopped. The priest said the rope had slipped, but Aldrich saw the fray near the knot. He ordered it retied. By afternoon, clouds had thickened. A small rain began, not enough to drive people indoors, but enough to beat on the cobbles. The keepers did not move from their places. As the light began to fade, the tall man returned to the center of the square. The hour has come, he said. We will hear the matter. The trial began without formality. No platform, no raised voices. The tall man repeated the questions, and Maris repeated her answers. The priest spoke for her character. The reeve confirmed her honesty in trade. The miller hesitated, then said he had never seen her cause harm. But the hesitation spoke almost as loudly as the words. Then the tall man asked the crowd if any had reason to fear her. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then a woman near the edge stepped forward. My child fell ill the day after she walked past our door. Others followed. A spoiled barrel, a sudden gust that ruined a drying sheet. Small things, none more than a coincidence. But together they began to form the shape the keepers had been carving since they arrived. Aldrich could feel the shift, like the moment a tide turns. When the last voice fell silent, the tall man closed his book. The measure is complete. He looked at Maris. You will be taken to stand judgment in the place appointed for such matters. And if I refuse, she asked, then you will be taken. The keeper stepped forward. That was the moment Aldrich moved again, not with a plan, but with the certainty that doing nothing would be the same as agreeing. She will not leave this square tonight, he said, not with you. You would place yourself against the old law? The tall man asked. I would place myself against injustice. The crowd held its breath. The keepers looked to their leader. Rain tapped on the well's rim. Finally, the tall man spoke. Then you claim her as your charge? I do. The keeper stepped back. The tall man's eyes narrowed. Then you are responsible for her at sunrise. She will be brought to the appointed place, or you will answer in her stead. Aldrich nodded once. At sunrise. They left the square as they had entered, without hurry, without wasted motion. But the weight they left behind was heavier than when they came. Maris turned to Aldrich. You've just made yourself their quarry. I was already in their sights, he said. The bell did not ring that night. The rope lay coiled at its base, as if waiting for a hand to claim it. The sun rose pale and cold on the morning after the hearing. Greyford was quiet in a way that made every sound carry too far. The creak of a door hinge, the bark of a dog, the scrape of a broom on stone. Sir Aldrich did not sleep that night. He had spent the hours walking the castle walls, then the square, always keeping the bakery within sight. Maris was inside, the shutters closed, though light glowed through the cracks. No bread was in the window. No customers came. Word had already moved through the village. At sunrise, she would be taken to the appointed place. By mid-morning, the keepers arrived. 3 first, then the tall leader, and last the 2 youngest. They did not dismount. Their presence alone was enough to clear the street. The tall man gave a nod toward the chapel, where the bell rope hung loose. It did not ring. Aldrich stepped into their path. "You will not take her until I say the word," he said. The tall man studied him. "And if you never say it?" "Then she stays." "You know the cost." "I do." They waited in the square, but neither side moved first. Hours passed, the sky thickening with gray clouds. A cold wind came from the river, carrying the smell of wet stone. The villagers kept their distance, some watching from doorways, others from the upper windows. Just after noon, the reeve came quietly to Aldrich. "If you're going to act, it must be before nightfall." "I know. They'll double their number by evening, and once she's in their hands, you won't see her again." In the bakery, Maris sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a mug of water. She did not look surprised when Aldrich stepped inside. "They will take you before sunset," he said. "I thought they'd wait until dawn." "They've lost patience." She set the mug down. "So have you." "Yes." He told her of the road to the west, the one less used, the one that passed through the old linden grove before bending toward the ford. "If we can reach the grove before night, they'll lose the trail in the dark. There's an old watch hut near the crossing. We can rest there until the second moonrise, then take the river." "They'll follow. They'll expect us to take the main road east, and they'll expect us to delay." Maris leaned back. "Then we don't delay." The reeve brought a cart under the pretense of delivering flour to the castle kitchens. Aldrich helped load it with sacks, hiding Maris beneath a layer of empty linen. The sound of grain shifting covered any movement inside. 2 of the keepers watched from the far side of the square. Aldrich lifted one of the sacks with deliberate slowness, nodded toward them, and started up the hill toward the castle. Once beyond the first turn of the road, the reeve steered the cart toward the linden grove. The grove stood silent in the dim light, the bare branches moving slightly in the wind. Aldrich helped Maris down. She stretched her legs, then pulled her cloak tighter. The reeve left them there, promising to speak loudly of seeing Aldrich in the castle yard. From the grove, the path narrowed, following the curve of the river. The water ran high from recent rains, its surface broken by white foam near the rocks. Twice they heard voices behind them, but each time the sound faded. As dusk thickened, they reached the old watch hut, little more than a stone shell with part of its roof missing. The air inside was dry, smelling faintly of ash from long-cooled fires. Aldrich closed the door as far as it would go and set a stone against it. "They'll search the main road first," he said. "We stay here until the second moonrise. Then we move." Maris sat against the wall, her head tilted back. "When we cross, what then?" "North to the hills. There are villages where the keepers don't reach often." She was silent for a while, then said, "You've thought about this before." "Yes." Autoritum. The hours passed in slow measures. Outside, the wind shifted, bringing the smell of rain again. Once a branch cracked somewhere in the trees, but no footsteps followed. Aldrich kept his sword within reach, though he hoped not to use it. Near midnight, faint light touched the edges of the broken roof. The second moon had risen. Aldrich helped Maris to her feet. "Ready?" he asked. "Yes." They stepped into the cold night. The river was only a short walk from the hut, but the ground was uneven, the stones slick. The water moved fast, the current pulling hard toward the bend. Halfway across, Maris slipped. Aldrich caught her arm, steadying her. The sound of the river masked other noises, but when they reached the far bank, he saw a flicker of movement upstream. A lantern swinging, too far to tell if it was a keeper or a fisherman. They moved quickly into the trees, following the narrow deer track that led to the northern slope. Behind them, the river's sound faded, replaced by the rustle of dry leaves. By the time they reached the ridge, the lantern was gone. Ahead, the hills rose dark against the pale horizon. "We keep moving," Aldrich said. Maris nodded. "Until they stop looking." "They won't." She glanced at him. "Then, until we find somewhere they can't reach." They walked on, the night closing around them, each step carrying them further from Greyford and deeper into whatever would come next. The night held them as they climbed deeper into the hills. The path was faint, little more than a thread between rocks and low trees, but Aldrich knew the land well enough to keep them moving without lanterns. Behind them, the river's roar faded until it was only memory. By the time the first line of gray touched the horizon, they had reached a high ridge. From there, the view stretched far, the valley where Greyford lay, the winding river, and beyond it the dark mass of the forest. No movement, no glint of metal in the dawn. Maris sat on a stone, catching her breath. "We should keep going before the sun rises fully." "We will," Aldrich said, scanning the slope, "but we'll choose our way carefully. They'll search both sides of the river, and they'll expect us to head straight north." "Then we don't." They took a side path that led them west, away from the obvious track. The ground was damp from old rain, the air heavy with the scent of pine. Here the forest grew denser, branches locking overhead, letting in only a narrow seam of light. Birds moved high in the canopy, their calls short and quick. Mid-morning brought them to a small clearing where an abandoned hut leaned against the edge of a rock face. The roof was patched with moss, the doorway half covered by ivy. Aldrich checked inside, empty, dry, with an old fire pit in the corner. He left the door open to show it was of no use. "We keep moving," he said. Maris looked at the hut for a moment longer. "It could have been a home once." "Many places could," he replied. "That doesn't make them safe." By midday, the forest thinned into open ground, cut with narrow streams. They drank from one, cupping their hands to catch the cold water. A hawk circled above, its shadow sliding over the grass. "They're not behind us," Maris said. "Not yet," Aldrich answered, "but they'll be moving in lines. The keepers are patient." She studied his face. "You faced them before." "Once. Not like this. Then it was my command to keep the peace. Now it's my choice to break it. And that makes you an outlaw," he finished. The sky darkened toward afternoon, clouds gathering over the western hills. They found shelter under a ledge of stone as rain began. Soft at first, then heavy enough to blur the edges of the world. The sound was steady, almost hiding the small noises of the forest. Maris sat with her knees drawn close, watching the curtain of rain. "When we cross into the next valley, will we be safe?" "Safe enough to rest, not enough to stop moving." She nodded slowly. "Then we keep moving." Toward evening, the rain eased. The air was clean, the ground slick. They followed the curve of the ridge until the land dropped away sharply into a narrow pass. Below, a stream ran fast between two walls of rock. On the far side, a track climbed again into the hills. Aldrich crouched, studying the pass. "It's a choke point. If they guess we're heading this way, they'll watch it." "Then we wait until night," Maris suggested. "No, the moon will rise bright tonight. We'll be seen. We go now." They descended carefully, using roots and ledges for support. At the bottom, the stream's water was icy around their boots. They climbed the opposite side quickly, breath misting in the cooling air. On the far ridge, they paused. From here, the land opened into a wide sweep of meadow, dotted with low shrubs. In the distance, a cluster of rooftops caught the last light of day. "That's not Greyford," Maris said. "No, another village, smaller. If we keep to the edge, we can pass without notice. They skirted the meadow, keeping low. The village sounds drifted faintly. A hammer on wood, a dog's bark, the murmur of voices. No sign of the keepers. By nightfall, they had passed the last of the houses and entered another stretch of forest. The trees here were older, their trunks wide, their branches high. The ground was soft with fallen needles. They stopped when the darkness made the path uncertain. Aldrich chose a spot beneath an old cedar and cleared a small space. They had no fire, but the air was warmer here, sheltered from the wind. Maris leaned against the trunk. "What will you do when they stop chasing us?" "They won't stop," he said, "but there's land far enough from their reach. Hills, rivers, other places to vanish into. And there, we start again." She smiled faintly. "With bread?" "With bread," he said, "and without bells." The night passed without disturbance. At dawn they rose and moved on, the forest thinning to show the sweep of a valley below. Mist lay in folds across it, curling around the trees. In the distance, the glint of water marked a larger river. Maris looked at it for a long time. "It's strange," she said, "to leave a place and know you won't go back." "Every road leads away from somewhere," Aldrich replied. "What matters is where it leads next." They started down the slope. Somewhere behind them, far enough to be almost mistaken for the wind, came the faint echo of a bell.